Hello, I'm Sarah McGrath. I'm editor-in-chief at Riverhead, and my favorite events are librarian events. So I'm really happy to be here with you guys. Liz Moore is the author of 3 previous wonderful literary novels. She's someone we at Riverhead have admired for years. Long Bright River is her first book with us here, and it's also a bit of a departure for her. It leaps her literary talents into the more commercial arena of crime fiction and police procedural, blending strong, powerful writing, emotional drama, and propulsive suspense. The result is a read that is at once heart-pounding and heart-wrenching. I fell head over heels for it, and people like Dennis Lehane, Megan Abbott, and Paula Hawkins all have too. The book is set against a vivid Philadelphia, and you quickly realize that Liz Moore can do for Philly what Dennis Lehane does for Boston, or Richard Price does for the Lower East Side, which is give us a cinematic, street-level crime story so integrated into its setting that the place is almost a character itself. At the center of the book are 2 sisters who occupy the exact same neighborhood, but their worlds could not be more different. One suffers from heroin addiction and lives on the streets. The other is a police officer whose beat includes those exact same blocks. Once inseparable, they no longer speak to each other. Then women start being murdered in the area, and then one of the sisters goes missing, and the other risks everything. The book weaves back and forth between the past and the present, powerfully unfolding the past shared by these sisters. You cannot look away. Liz will tell you all the things that informed the writing of this book, but what she won't say is that the result is so extraordinary, and it puts a compassionate human face on the effect that addiction can have, not just on the victim, but on the friends and the families of that person for generations. It's been a year since I first read this book, but I still find myself returning to the characters in my mind, like visiting them, remembering the pleasure of knowing them. And it might sound surprising that a story full of tension and mystery and murder can be so intensely pleasurable to read, but there is no other word for it. The pleasure comes from the tautness of the plot, the intelligence of the narrative, the beauty of her prose, and the humanity that she brings to her characters. There is intense excitement for this book in our halls, and we're so excited to share it with all of you. Liz?
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. Thank you, Library Marketing at Penguin Random House, for bringing everybody here, and also for this stool, which I requested because I'm super pregnant, in case that is not visibly apparent. I am pregnant enough so that I feel like I make people nervous just by being in the same room with them. So don't worry, everyone. I have a stool if I feel that I need it. I'd like to begin by actually saying my galley, which I'm holding for the first time today, very excitingly, it never gets old, is sadly the galley that today is stuck in the mailroom of this building. So it may come to you. You have it! It arrived! That's wonderful. Okay, great. I was going to say Library Marketing extremely kindly was promising to mail them all to you after the fact if they didn't arrive, but it sounds like they're here, so that's even better. So let me begin by saying thank you for the support of many of you in this room for my previous 2 novels. Well, I have 3 novels, but especially Heft and The Unseen World, which were really strongly buoyed by librarians all over the country, and maybe some of you in this room had a hand in that as well. And so today I'm excited to introduce Long Bright River to a community that's hugely important to me. It comes as no surprise that many authors have stories about libraries and librarians who had a profound impact on them. I'm no different. Many of my early memories take place at the central branch of the Public Library of Framingham, Massachusetts, where my favorite librarian was not only my trusted recommender of books, but also my actual neighbor, which felt a little bit like having a celebrity living on my block. As formative as those childhood memories in Framingham's libraries were for me, I'd like to talk about a different library today, specifically the McPherson Square branch of the Philadelphia Free Library, which is located in a Philadelphia neighborhood called Kensington, recently referred to in the New York Times as the largest open-air narcotics market for heroin on the East Coast. Kensington also happens to be where my novel, Long Bright River, is set. In the past few years, the McPherson Square Library has made headlines in Philadelphia and around the country for an unusual reason. It's librarians, tired of feeling disempowered in the face of the heroin and fentanyl overdoses happening nearly daily in its bathrooms and on its front lawn, decided to take matters into their own hands. Without waiting for anyone's approval, they requested training in overdose reversal from the Kensington-based social services organization Prevention Point. Now all librarians and security guards at the McPherson Square branch are equipped with and regularly dispense Narcan, an opioid antagonist that can prevent overdoses if administered promptly. I think this story illustrates 2 points. The first is what powerful community organizers librarians are and always have been. When, on my many visits to Kensington over the last decade, I first began hearing about the McPherson Square Librarians' vigilante life-saving initiative, my instinct was to simultaneously thank them and to apologize to them. Librarians, of course, should not have to be first responders and should not be required to provide the services that a city or country fails to provide. But everyone who lives and works in Kensington ends up lending a hand one way or another, because the other point the story illustrates is just how dire the situation in Kensington has become. Although this neighborhood offers a particularly extreme example, it's not that far removed from what's happening elsewhere. All over the country, maybe in some of your libraries or communities, maybe even in some of your families, people are falling victim to a pattern that usually begins with improperly prescribed or illicitly purchased opioid medication and often ends in life-threatening addiction. On one level, Long Bright River tells a story like this one, but it also seeks to ask bigger questions about how family members can both support and fail one another, and how a community can support or fail its own citizens. The novel follows 2 sisters who grow up next door to Kensington and who, as adults, find themselves drawn to the neighborhood for very different reasons. Casey, the younger sister, has followed in her parents' footsteps and found herself living on the street and doing sex work to fund her addiction to heroin and other opioids. Mickey, the older, is conversely an ultra-responsible single mother who has become a police officer and now patrols the same district her sister haunts. Officially, the 2 sisters are estranged, but when Casey goes missing at the same time that a string of murders begins in the neighborhood, Mickey's long-buried loyalty and protectiveness compels her to go looking for her sister, both on and off the job. In the process, she is forced to question all of her preconceived notions about addiction, sex work, and the ethics of the Philadelphia Police Department. I count 2 sources of inspiration for Long Bright River. The first is personal. Like many families in the United States, mine has been affected by a multi-generational struggle with addiction that continues to this day. I'm not inclined to speak about the specifics, but I can say that I grew up in a household in which addiction was a regular topic of conversation, and for that reason, it's a theme that often pops up in my writing. My second source of inspiration for Long Bright River is more recent. In about 2009, shortly after I moved to Philadelphia, the photographer Jeffrey Stockbridge invited me to accompany him to Kensington to record audio interviews with his latest photographic subjects, the men and women who had become essentially trapped in the neighborhood by their addiction to opioids. Some of them had intended to come for a night, but had ended up staying for years. A decade ago, there was little media coverage about the neighborhood, and I was drawn back again and again, first with Jeff, and eventually on my own, to talk to its residents and learn more. In the people I met there, I recognized something familiar to me, a great longing for change alongside a feeling of profound stuckness, an inability to see a way to affect that change. I knew that this was the sort of conflict that could drive a novel, but I was afraid to write it. I kept a sort of diary of my visits there, wrote and published some nonfiction about Kensington, and started a short story that would eventually transform into the basis of the novel. I began doing community work, too, running free writing workshops for women at a day shelter in the neighborhood. I wrote and released 2 novels, had a baby, moved 3 times. All the while, the novel called to me. In about 2015, its urgency quieted somewhat the fears I had about writing it, and I began to work in earnest. Since then, I've grown very attached to these characters. Now, when I go to Kensington, I see Mickey and Casey in every face I pass. What I see in them, and what I hope readers will see in them too, is their humanity. Some of the people I've gotten to know in Kensington grew up in abusive households or with parents who themselves suffered from addiction. Others grew up in happier circumstances but fell into addiction following back surgery or after becoming injured on the job. I've met nurses, construction workers, and teachers. Most upsettingly, I've met lots and lots of parents who, after they fell into addiction, have lost their children to family members or to social services. It is difficult to overstate the devastation they feel about this loss and the worthlessness and helplessness they feel at being trapped in a cycle they can't seem to escape. These are the emotions that are dramatized in Long Bright River in the person of Casey, the younger sister in the book, and her friends. But there's another set of people I've met in and around Kensington, and they too are reflected in the novel. They're the parents, siblings, children, and friends of the addicted. Most of them feel two contrasting emotions: terrible anger at their loved one, and simultaneously a great love for the person and a longing to return to normalcy. All of them speak with real tenderness about the way the addicted person used to be. All of them remember with affection a child who could make a whole room laugh, a child who loved school, a child who stood out on the basketball court, or a child who loved books. All of them are in deep mourning for the loss of a promising young person. Mickey, the responsible older sister in the book, remembers her sister Casey in this way, and it's these memories that drive her to go looking for answers when Casey disappears, despite their long estrangement. I hope that Long Bright River will draw in readers both with and without a personal connection to addiction. It's the first novel I've written that contains elements of a thriller or police procedural, and in that way I hope it might offer something to readers of those genres and people seeking a page-turning book. But it's still part of the arc of all the books I've ever written, and therefore I hope it also contains some of the characteristics of my other work, including a deep investment in the emotional life of my characters and in the setting I'm depicting. Thank you for listening. Thank you also for your work, not just as curators of books and information, but also as activists, advocates for social justice, and community organizers. I've seen it firsthand in Kensington, and I've heard about it all over the country. I hope you enjoy Long Bright River.